So I'm really excited to hear what Doug has to share today with us on thriving in conflict and how we could use those situations to achieve even better results. So please help me welcome Doug to our nice car event.
Great. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it. How's the sound? Can you all hear me okay?
Sure.
Great. Thanks for having me in here. So, and thanks for the kind introduction, Chris. I feel like I owe you money here. So, or at least come home with me and tell my children those things. So, I'm really excited to be here. I know this is your kickoff meeting for the year, and my hope is that during the time that we're together, I can provide you with some insights and some tools that maybe you can use to even accomplish greater things in 2019 and beyond. This is a topic for which I'm very passionate. As a matter of fact, the second book that's coming out is the title by the same program name, which is Thriving in Conflict. So I go around the country, I work with organizations. How can we take conflict and leverage that to create better results? So let's just start with a quick poll. How many people here in the room are facing some form of conflict in their work life right now? Show of hands. Yeah, I should see a lot more than that, by the way. So, wherever I go, wherever I ask that question, I see lots of hands going up. And it's not you. It's not your industry. This is what we're dealing with all the time. We are surrounded by conflict. It's part of our day-to-day life. Some of us may have wanted to put up more than one hand, maybe two hands, a couple of feet, right? But it's around us. And sometimes we can see that conflict, we can see it clearly. Sometimes we don't see it so well, and there's other times when we can sense it, but we don't even see it. I'll give you an example. I was in a client meeting recently, and there was something going on under the surface, and I could feel it in my gut. And there was a fog in the air that you could cut with a knife. Have you guys ever been in that meeting before? I don't know what's happening, right? So sometimes those conflicts are happening, and we can only sense and feel them. And it's something, conflict, when we bring the word up, is something that we want to avoid. If I called you up and said, could you come to my office? I'd like to have some conflict with you. Would you be excited to come see me? Probably not. Some might, right? The attorney's in the room, right? They're good at that. And I mean that affectionately, not as a criticism. So, but some people do better with it than others, but I think most of us are hardwired. We look at conflict as something that should be remediated, dodged, ducked, and beaten out like a forest fire, right? And we can relate to that. If you think of the words that come to mind when I use the term conflict, they're not necessarily great words. If you looked it up in the dictionary, look at the words that are associated with conflict. Things like combative, dramatic, win-lose. But I want to take conflict and I want to switch it 180 degrees. So the two things I want to do in our short time here together today is, first of all, I want to pivot. I want to switch how we think about conflict to see it as an opportunity for us in our day-to-day work. And the second thing I want to do is I want to give you a couple of tools that I found that really help out in terms of getting clarity around conflict and also addressing it effectively in a way that helps to build those relationships and also try to accomplish things when we're working with clients. So, but as you think about conflict, I don't know about you, did anybody ever take any kind of training or education in conflict? Anybody ever do that? A few hands went up in the room, right? But for the most part, we weren't taught how to deal with it. We learned how to deal with conflict. And there's a place that we learn to deal with conflict. And I'm going to ask for some shout outs in a second here. Think about how you deal with conflict. Who taught you? Where did you learn? Let's get a couple of quick shout outs. Where'd you learn how to deal with conflict? Shout it out. Our children, our dad. Other places? That's an inside joke I'm not supposed to get, right? So what else? Where else did we learn? School, on the playground, from our teachers. The most significant place that we learned how to deal with conflict, however, is our parents, right? So our conflict style is really driven by our families. Okay, I'll ask you to raise hand. How many people here in the room think their parents did an effective job teaching them how to deal with conflict? Show of hands. Few hands, look around. But a lot of us, no, really weren't taught well. I'm not going to go into group therapy in here. That's not what this is about. But what I want us to see is that what we learned about, how we learned and what we learned about dealing with conflict wasn't necessarily the most effective way to deal with it. Is that fair? And here's the kicker. Whoever you're dealing with in conflict, if they were in this room, their hands probably would not have gone up either when I asked them if they learned effective ways to deal with it. And we wonder why, when we're in conflict, things go sideways. And that's why. Because we're all walking around as kind of wounded warriors in the process, if you will. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change what we mean by conflict. I'd love to get rid of the word. And by the way, on your tables, there's a light blue card. What I tried to do is just summarize a couple of things on that card that you can take with you. So if you're sitting there going, I want to remember this, I'm hoping I captured it on there. The first thing I want to do is I want to change the definition of conflict. Conflict, and I'm talking business only. I don't want to get into family therapy here. But in business, to me, conflict is nothing more than a gap. It's a gap. It's a gap between what I expect and what I experience. So for example, if I'm working on a project and it's running behind schedule, then that's a gap between what I expect to happen and when I expect it to happen, or what we agreed to, and the ground truth of what's happening at that moment. Make sense? If somebody's screaming at me and it happens, that's a gap between what I expect when I'm dealing with somebody and how they treat people. If I'm working in a partnership and somebody does an end around in my agreement and they go to my client directly without telling me, that's a gap between how I want to do business and how they do business. So the first thing, and the reason that I think that this is important, and the reason I think about it as a gap, is it allows me to depersonalize it. Because I don't know about you, when something goes wrong, I am looking for that wringable neck. Do you know what I mean? That's our first reaction. Who's going to die here today, right? And as a matter of fact, if you ask me about a conflict, what I'll start doing is talking about somebody, and I can vilify them. I have this amazing superpower. I can vilify somebody to the point that I can make the tyrants of the world look like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. And we tend to do that. Does that resonate for you? That when something goes bad, we're looking, who are we going to blame? The client, the contractor, the whatever. Name whatever group you're working, engineering firm, architectural firm. We look for blame. So by looking at it as a gap, it allows me to start to de-escalate and not personalize the situation. The second part of our definition is when I have a gap, that is now an opportunity for me and others to get deeper understanding. So I don't know if you've had this happen, but we walk into situations, or I've walked into situations thinking, I know exactly what's going on. And have you ever gotten in there and then you find out, oh, no, there's way more to that story. Or we had bad information from somebody about what was happening. It reminds me of the comedian who said, his joke was, he said, you're not a parent unless you have 2 children, because if you have one, you know who to blame. It was funnier when he said it, by the way. But I think the same thing holds true in our work environments, because we work in complex systems with complex people, lots of moving parts. And we go into the situation, I think our first opportunity is to start to look and see what's really happening, what's going on, because there's always more to the story. Now, by me talking about, this gap and getting better understanding, sometimes I have, especially technical types, they're like, oh, this is that warm, fuzzy stuff. We're going to sit around campfires and do some chanting and burn some incense. That's not what it's about to me. To me, and this is the third part of the definition, to me, it's about results, right? If you're accomplishing all the results that you want today, you're free to go. I don't know about you, there's always opportunities for me to do better, to get more effective in what I'm doing, and more to learn, right? And that's hard to do when you're in conflict. The other thing I would say about conflict is I think we look at it as a either or. It's an absolute, so you're either in conflict or you're not. But I think conflict is a spectrum, right? It's like a forest fire. Forest fire doesn't magically erupt somewhere. It starts with a spark somewhere. Then you have smoke. Then you have flames, and then eventually it spreads and erupts into a wildfire. I think the same thing happens at work. Do you ever have that happen? You know something's not right. We don't deal with it, And then it gets worse and it gets worse until finally we have to deal with it. So you might think that I'm going to suggest to you that you rush into conflict like the firefighter runs into a 5-alarm fire. That's not where I'm going. I think the opportunity for us is to see the gap sooner and to deal with the gap sooner when it's just a spark before it erupts into something major. So how can you do that? This is where I want to give you 2 things. First of all, when you're in conflict, stop and take a pause. Take a beat. Because too many times we react to those situations and we only make matters worse. And I'm going to use an example. Somebody showing up late for meetings, right? Drives me crazy. So, and somebody shows up late after they've done it 3 or 4 times, and then finally I just snap and I say the wrong thing. Now what's the issue? What do you think? It now becomes me. Let's deal with the situation, which is being late to the meeting. So I want to give you 5 questions. Now, am I asking you to do a questionnaire on yourself when you're in conflict? No. What I would suggest to you is if you feel that gut feeling, something's not right, stop, take a pause, and these are 5 questions that might help you to think about it differently. The first question is this: what are you seeing, experiencing, feeling? What's going on around you? Because just like I said, sometimes we have that gut feeling that something's not right, we can't put our name to it. I think the first step is start looking at what's happening. You can write it down, you can capture it in your smartphone, but at least ask yourself what's happening. I do this, so my wife, when she knows when I'd run some businesses and I'd be leaving work and I'm like, I don't want to go home yet because I can't really figure out what's going on, and I would just drive. I drive south, because if you go north, you end up in the lake. And I had a rule: I don't drive on major roads, only on secondary roads, and I go south until I've gotten some level of clarity. And by the way, and this is true, one time I hit the Pennsylvania border. I said, I think I need to turn around and go back. But you know, we have these things that are going on, and we're like, what are we going to do with them? That was my way of getting clarity. What's really going on? Right? So I think the first thing is ask yourself, what are you seeing and experiencing? The second question is, what's bugging you? Somebody showing up late for a meeting is not what bugs me. I'm not your mother, this isn't grammar school, I'm not taking time and attendance. What bugs me about being late is I have to rewind my meeting to bring you up to speed, or we've now compressed our meeting. You know, instead of being 2 to 3, it's 2:15 to 3, and we've got to do it in 2/3 of the time that we planned to originally. So what's bugging you? It isn't about the attendance, right? The third question I want to give you is, why is it bugging you? Because it might bug me that they're late for the meeting, that I have to rewind, that they're not getting the information they want, but what's really bugging me is what? Anybody want to guess why it might bug me when somebody's late to a meeting? It's disrespectful. And they don't mean it that way, but that's the way that I take it. Or I think that they believe their time is more important than mine. Or another one might be that I think they're not committed to the project at the level that I'm committed to it. So the reason the why question is different is because that gets behind my assumptions and my judgments, right? I'm making a judgment about what their intent is and what's going on with them. It lets me, again, de-escalate, because I could be wrong. I don't know what their intent is. I don't know if they think they're more important than me, but that's what's triggering me. And that's one of the questions that goes in the why question, is when you're in conflict, ask yourself, what's triggering you? Because there's certain things that trigger me. Do you guys know what I mean when I say that? Does that resonate for you? Like, if I were to ask you, I'm not asking you now in front of a bunch of people, but if I were to ask you things that trigger you, could you tell me? Probably pretty straightforward. So that's the why part. So that's the third question. Fourth question. This is a tough one. I don't like it. I don't like to do it. The question is, where's your DNA on the crime scene here? Because I told you, and I call this, I have these little axioms. You can laugh at me later. I call it the sin of externalization. What we want to do when there's a problem is we want to externalize and blame other people, right? I told you, I like to vilify others. By the way, don't be afraid. Feel bad for my family, but that's another matter. But we want to vilify others, but I think that reflecting on where our DNA might be on the crime scene helps us to get prepared to have that conversation and also start to de-escalate. I was working with, I have a client, they're about $1 billion REIT, real estate investment trust. I was working with the tax group. I'm sitting with the tax group, they're buying assets, right? Tax group is just bashing the closing group. They're going on and on. The closing group, they don't get the work done right, they don't complete the paperwork, they're making our job more difficult, they don't understand the implications. I'm sitting there going, whoa, it's like blowing my hair back. And I let them go for a while until the wind kind of fell out of their sails. And then I turned around and I said, hey, I just want to check in with you. Is there any way that you guys might be contributing to this situation with a closing group? And that was a tough conversation. That sounds easy here in the room. It is not easy to do with somebody in that moment. But you know what? What's really cool is they knew exactly how they had contributed. Because first of all, they were shooting these emails over the transom instead of going to talk to them. They did some training, right? But they never went back and followed up. They didn't help them. They didn't tell them when they were making mistakes. They were talking around them to everybody else, but they weren't really talking to the closing group. So I think asking that question about where your DNA is on the crime scene helps us to self-reflect, because I promise you, if you're not willing to self-reflect where you might be contributing, no one is going to be willing to do it with you. So when you go in to deal with conflict and you're expecting that somebody owns up to their part of it, they're not going to unless you do. The last question is, what's at stake? So it may be clear to you what's at stake for you. The project's at stake, the client's at stake, maybe there's money at stake. But I think we need to reflect on what's at stake for them. Because they may not care about your project, they may not care about your client, but they darn sure care about themselves. So if you want to motivate change, if you want to start working your way through a conflict, first, I think you can see where you have things that are in stake for your projects, but I think being aware of and sensitive what's at stake for them. And I want to show you how it's going to come into play. So am I asking you to go list out these questions and do a little book report when you're in conflict? No, but I think if you start asking these questions, it will help us get clearer when we have a gap. And that's really what it's about. If conflict is a gap, how can I see it better, more effectively, sooner? Once you see it, then the question is, how do you name it? I like mnemonics, so letters together that help me remember something. So when dealing with conflict, I'm going to give you a mnemonic. It's on your card there. It's called NEW, N-E-W. And NEW, think of it this way. I want to create a new result. So NEW stands for the three things that I need to address when we're in conflict. One, I need to be able to name it. Two, I need to be able to give an example or examples of what's happening. And three, I need to address why. And by the way, that's the one we miss the most. Know why? Nothing's going to change. So what would that look like? First of all, naming it I think is important. The person who's late for the meeting, telling them that they're a jerk and disrespectful, I don't think that's an effective way to name it. And I'll give you an example in a minute. I'll walk through what it might sound like so you can see how it might play. But naming it helps me to create focus and make sure that I haven't personalized it too much. In this case, I want to talk to them about their participation in the meeting. The examples are there to support what you named. Here's what's interesting. Too many times I've worked with clients and they're trying to name it, and they name one thing and they give me examples for something else. They're not showing up for meetings. By the way, their work product is a piece of crap, right? So those two don't match. So make sure the examples tie into it. And the last part is why. And again, I think the why is about how you motivate change. If there's something in it for them, something at stake, then something is going to change. If there's nothing at stake, nothing is going to change. So in our example, so that's our new statement. And I think there needs to be one more piece in there. And if you remember, our definition is the gap. And the second part is create understanding. I want to hear their perspective, what's going on from their perspective. So I like to include just a short, easy statement at the end that says, help me understand what's going on from your perspective. What do you see? What are you experiencing? Invite them into the conversation. So I want to use a simple example because it's easier to do that. By the way, I have done this on the full spectrum of conflict, from just simple observational things all the way to the raging fires. But I'm using a simple one. Somebody's late for a meeting or has been late for meetings. Here's how I would do it using this framework. I'm going to use the name hypothetical Joe, not somebody here in the room. But Joe, I want to talk with you about your attendance in our meetings. I've noticed over the last 3 weeks that you're late on a majority of the cases. This concerns me because I know you're not getting the information you need to complete the project, and it also might affect how others are perceiving you. I'd be interested in understanding your perspective and what you want to do with this. Does that make sense to y'all? So did you hear the new? Name it, examples why, and then you tell me what's going on. That's 3 to 4 sentences. That's it. Now that sounds easy here in the room. I find it's important for me to step back and reflect. And actually, in a lot of cases, I write it down and I practice it out loud. Because what happens is when we go to deliver feedback, we put in too many words, then we stumble, and it doesn't come across clearly, and nothing's going to change. So it's there for you. If it makes sense, go try it out in your conversations. Now people wonder, well, what do you do then? Well, there's a whole lot more to the equation. I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but if we're really interested in hearing other people's perspectives, then I think what we need to do after we've introduced that is to ask them, tell me more, and let them tell their story, and just listen. Take the example, I worked with somebody who liked to yell and scream at people. Nobody here in the room I know would ever do that, but have you ever worked around somebody that's a screamer? It's the same thing. I want to talk to you, no, I'm not going to talk to them about yelling and screaming, I'm going to talk to you about how you communicate with other people. Here's what I noticed. I noticed you were screaming at one of the paralegals in the hallway, and this is really concerning. It not only affects that person's willingness to work with you, but everybody else who heard it, right? But help me understand. And then I start to hear from them, oh, you know, there are other things going on. This one person always is incomplete in their work, and they're trying to coach them and develop them. So I would encourage you to just try it out, stop, take a pause, ask some questions, and then find a way to tee it up in a way that starts that conversation. So here's what I hope I did in our short time together, because I think I'm right on the mark, right? One is, I wanted us to think about conflict in a different way, right? So we think about conflict, run the other way, or it's time to go grab somebody and tell them off. Neither one of those are good for us. Second is, start looking at it as an opportunity for my business, because when you have conflict, when you have disagreement, it is an opportunity for your people to learn, for you to learn, for customers to learn. Take advantage of it. I gave you 5 questions. Take a beat. Just take a breath. Ask yourself, challenge yourself a little bit. Look at the why. Look at where your DNA is on the crime scene. Just the discipline of doing that, even if you do it after the fact, will start making it into your language in the future. I also hope that by doing this, I've given you a way to start to talk with the people that you're working with instead of talking around them, at them, about them with other people. I want to leave you with one axiom, okay? So I have these little axioms. Is it fair to assume that when I'm in conflict with somebody, I would want them to be direct with me? Is that fair? What do you think? Yeah, thank you for doing the yes, but the answer is no. Because it's like, no, I don't want to hear that because it's at the wrong time, in the wrong place, in the wrong way, but I really do. I want you to be direct with me. But here's the axiom, and it's on your card. We need to be direct. Get to the point, but we need to do it with respect for the other person. And I think some of that preparation process allows me to take off my armor of righteousness, put away my sword, and actually sit down and start to engage at a different level. 20 minutes, pretty fast, tried to get a lot in there. I hope I was in service to you. I hope that the couple things that I've given you will help you as you go out into 2019 and start engaging with your partners and your customers to engage in conversations in a different way. You're welcome to reach out. You want to know more about it? I'm not trying to sell you. You can send me a note and say, hey, Doug, could you explain this to me? I'll take the time to do it with you. It's fun to me, so don't hesitate. I appreciate the invitation to come in. Thank you for the invite, Chris, and with that, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.